It's my great pleasure to bring you the Reverend Jack Donovan as he considers with us a question: who writes this book of life? Reverend Jack.
Thank you, Linda. A week ago, this past Thursday, as the sun set on Yom Kippur, the last day to atone for any rightful judgment against you, God is said to have finalized the book of life, sealing everyone's destiny for happiness or misery for the coming year and perhaps beyond. God is said to write this annual judgment of your life's worth according to your moral conduct, atonement, and repentance in obedience to divine law. That is one understanding of how the book of life is written. When I was growing up as a Roman Catholic, the major questions of life, what is the nature of reality, of morality, and of authority, were answered by the church. The nature of reality: you are helplessly fallen in sin and damned, unless saved by the power of God's grace, to be received as a sacrament at each of the 7 stages of your life. The nature of morality: you can receive that empowering grace only by worshiping God with gratitude, repentance, and obedience to divine law for each stage. And the nature of authority: God's grace is given only through the sacramental rituals under church authority, divinely authorized by Christ. That is another understanding of how the book of life is written. You might recall from high school English classes a verse from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The moving finger writes, and having writ moves on, nor all thy piety nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all thy tears wash out a word of it. In some views, it is God's finger writing and moving on. Somewhat chilling, even paralyzing for some high schoolers and others. Metaphorically, I'd say it's important to be written up well in the book of life. My questions are: how do you think it is written? And what can you do about that? I think the answers are critical because the prevailing answers have been killing us. But probably like you, I've seen things that give hope. For example, after college, as mentioned earlier, I served as a Peace Corps volunteer on the Central Pacific, in the Central Pacific Islands. One day I was chatting with folks on a village green when a very little boy tried to open a coconut with the swing of a machete, just like the grown-ups do. But the blade ricocheted off the coconut and slashed a snooping nearby dog. Yes, the dog was cared for, but most immediately someone knelt by the little boy and said, he doesn't understand yet. Everybody in the circle nodded. Yes, he'll learn in due time. Growth was presumed. When village decisions were made, consensus was the process, little children included. The island way gleaned from thousands of undisturbed years in paradise was for all to fully grow in understanding and in caring and in blessing. All must be fully free to participate in writing the book of life. A couple of years later, as a U.S. Foreign Service officer assigned to work in the province of the city of Hue in Vietnam, assigned to work with refugees, orphanages, and damaged villages, I again saw what I'd call an organic communal worldview. Despite the ravaging war, the people and the villages held together. Pulled together, it seemed to me, by the gravitational force of rituals thousands of years old, tending rice paddies, celebrating babies, honoring elders, commemorating ancestors, blessing homes, creating beauty, welcoming with communion over green tea, even strangers like me. These stages of growth, harvest, and rest were assumed for both crop fields and for people. I think I also saw this view reflected in the Buddhist and the Catholic nuns who ran the several orphanages in that provincial capital city of Hue, in their compassionate caregiving, and also in their caution about letting orphans be adopted by American families. Worried that Vietnamese children raised in consumerist, industrialist America would not find the help necessary to fulfill the writing of their book of life. On my own journey, sometime after returning to the States, I was invited by a political activist friend to come hear the city's mayoral candidates speak at his church's Sunday forum. And afterward, tricky friend, he suggested I stay for the service, which was Unitarian Universalist. The tradition of my best friends growing up in Concord, Massachusetts, perhaps America's only Unitarian majority town. So why not stay? I was looking for a different church then anyway. And this was different. At the sermon, a singer stood with the minister, strummed his guitar, and sang the opening verse of Willie Nelson's Red-Headed Stranger. Then came the minister's initial sermonic commentary, then a Willie Nelson verse, then the minister, and so on. The message: it takes an understanding, caring community to help humans grow safe, strong, free, and good. That was the kind of community I had been looking for. And my friend's UU congregation was precisely one of those. Here were American Unitarianism's inspired beginnings, William Ellery Channing's call to grow in likeness unto God, Ralph Waldo Emerson's call to cultivate great spiritedness from our potential-filled seed of being, that is the human soul. Henry David Thoreau's call to not waste that potential on anything trivial or superfluous or soul-killing, and Margaret Fuller's call to live with your only object being to grow. Here were ties from those Unitarians back to ancient wisdom like Diotima in Greece, Buddha in India, and Jesus' unison call with them to grow in understanding and caring. And also linking forward to the call of modern physics, developmental psychology, and neuroscience, showing us more and more of why and how to grow. Here even were links to, for me, unexpected, completely unexpected lights from the very Unitarian novel Frankenstein by Unitarian Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, to Jungian dream work full of surprises, and to Kenyan Nobel Peace Laureate Wangari Maathai and her village life remembrances from Kenya. Here was an organic, developmental, religious community, of naturalists, mystics, humanists, scientists, peace seekers, justice seekers, and just seekers as companions on the spiritual journey, making time for dialogue, questioning, reflection, meditation, sharing life stories, extracting their wisdom. Here was a way to grow understanding, caring, and well-being for self, others, and the source of creative energy in all. And here was a developmental way for us to write fulfillment into the book of life. Here we could reply to the old fatalistic poet Omar Khayyam, we are the moving finger, writing with the ink of creation and with the letters and words of our own human genome, discovering there is hope in wit when wit means wisdom, discovering there is hope in piety when piety means caring, reflecting on the whole book of life to understand and care enough to wash our subsequent pages clean of cruelty and fill them with beatitude. Because of that discovery, I never missed a Sunday service there until I went off to the UU seminary in 1983. A few years after the Unitarians merged in 1961, the member congregations consolidated their many values and in 1986 covenanted to affirm and promote them as described in our 7 principles. These 7 reflect, perhaps accidentally, the structure and content of psychology's and philosophy's developmental life stages, and surprise, of Catholicism's 7 sacraments. But the UU principles don't identify as the primary motive force at each stage psychological need or crisis or religious obedience. Rather, I would say the principles are sets of virtues that are potential in humankind. Potentials, in short, for deep understanding and deep caring, the overarching spiritual potentials. Their development and fulfillment depend on mutual nurturance in all of our relationships with self, with others, and with the source in all. Working from the phrases of the UU principles, I'd say humankind's most fundamental potential is our inherent sense of worth, felt in infants and parents as a survival instinct, inherited from the very first surviving life form in existence, expressed in infants as a crying demand, a demand for help. With nurturance, the sense of human worth grows from within the being, individual being, to mutual, to universal sense of worth. History shows, often by failures, that if we are to thrive, we must help each other write the book of life. It appears that the age-old challenges of greed, fear, and delusion will always be with us as long as we remain genetically human. Obedience to the powers that be, who claim divine authorization, has long been humankind's coerced and coercive path. But that has kept us short of the expansive dimensions of the human spirit required to transcend the divisiveness of our instincts and the diversity of our personalities and cultures. Fulfilling our thoughtful cooperative potentials for thriving will depend on managing our reactive competitive potentials for surviving. Seems to me that developing that spirit management capacity is Unitarian Universalism's work. We cannot, should not presume that any seeker enters our doors fully developed or predetermined. All we can expect is that with each other's help, we will grow and be as good for life as humans can be, which would be very good. A UU congregation, I think, is made up of helpers being helped. And that's what I'd call worship Unitarian Universalist style. Not growth inhibiting repentance and obedience, but worth shaping, worth shipping, worth giving. A meaning derived from the Old English word weorth shippe. Weorth meaning worth, and shippe meaning shape and ship and give. In short, the UU way of worship, helping with the full spiritual development of the potentials described in our principles, is to shape our worth from our potential virtues for understanding and caring, and to help give that worth to self, others, and source. It is developmental. It is spiritual development. It is how we can write the book of life, encouraged by each other and learning to encourage, shaping worth at the core of our beings and outward to the edges of being itself. When I was about to leave Vietnam long ago, 3 Buddhist nuns from one of the orphanages came to my office to say goodbye. They brought me this little plaster statue. One of the nuns said, "This is Kuan Yin. She is a bodhisattva, our goddess of compassion. She will help you keep growing." And she gave it to me. And Kuan Yin has helped me keep growing, as have so many people. So for the engraved last page of my book of life, the epitaph I plan is, "At least I kept growing. And I thank you for your help." How about you?
Ooh. To say thank you, Reverend Jack, feels totally inadequate, but thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for expressing so eloquently why I come to the UU and why I stay and how grateful I am to learn here. The floor is open for discussion. Anybody have any comments, questions? To put my glasses on and look at the screen where I can see this. Anyone? Patrick? Patrick?
Yeah,
Patrick and then Lydia.
I was wondering what when you were in Hue and what your job was there, if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. In those days, the State Department and the Foreign Service in general had partnered with military teams in the different provinces to provide a variety of different kinds of services. Some of them were essentially to advance the war. Others were more humanitarian, in particular to work with refugees and villages that had been shattered and to rebuild those villages. And so that was the USAID job that I had as a Foreign Service officer, to work. So every day I was out in one of the villages that had been devastated, or at one of the new refugee sites, or I was at the orphanages. And largely that was to help with reconstruction, to bring supplies, and to bring teams of people to help with reconstruction, and to bring food. I ran the Food for Peace program. And generally, I was just a frequent presence in the villages and in the orphanages.
And what years were those?
That was one full year, overlapping 1971 and 70 and 71.
I was over in Vietnam in 1968 and 69 in the Air Force, and I'm just, stunned that we had Forest Service people there helping to promote forestry when we were putting Agent Orange to eliminate forests, and I was exposed to that stuff. And I left the U.S. Irish Catholic teenager, and then when I came back, I started going to Unitarian churches because I found great causes for not believing in the dogma that I had, and found the Unitarians to be very welcoming to people that didn't want to kill people anymore.
Yeah, that's I was drafted in 1966, the day after I received my notice of acceptance into the Peace Corps. But I still had to go to the draft board in my local hometown, and they said, "Well, why do you want to go in the Peace Corps?" And I said, "I'd rather help than kill." And I think they thought I was so amazingly naive that they let me go into the Peace Corps.
Lydia?
Yeah, hi. Wow, I'm so pleased. Thank you for coming
Mhm.
here. It's amazing how both you and Patrick had an experience of a deep nature where you're experiencing how going over to kill makes you overwhelmingly peaceful and Unitarian when you came out, and of course you lucked out. People I knew, of course, they were leaving for Canada because they couldn't qualify for a deferment or any kind of conscientious objector. It was very hard to get that. And ordinary people that couldn't buy off draft boards really had a hard time. I was asking Linda by the chat several times. I really would like her to post the source of that amazing reading that Eddie did today. I've never heard that before. And I'm really quite stunned at how much Unitarianism actually shaped my life before I even knew that I wanted to dig it up and find it for real. It was always through association. My father, who's descended from the Adams families of Massachusetts, and all of that source, and incredibly finding out that it taught itself to you and to Patrick. It just was there, like an opening flower in the midst of destruction in Vietnam. I've written some ballads about Vietnam too. I'm just overwhelmed with there are no coincidences, and it's so great that you came to us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The reading, by the way, is from Plato's Symposium. If you're referring to Diotima's teaching to Socrates, is that the one you were referring to?
I don't know what Eddie wrote, whatever Eddie read to us.
That would be the second reading.
Oh, the second one is from William Ellery Channing's sermon at an ordination in 1828. If you looked up William Ellery Channing, Likeness unto God, you'd find it.
Okay,
It's beautiful.
thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes, I was also in Vietnam, also drafted in 1966. Unfortunately, I was brought back from Canada by my father, who was serving on the draft board of our hometown.
Ah, man.
Yeah, can you imagine? Because I was trying to be an actor, I was in the National Theatre School of Canada, and my father preferred me to be at war rather than to be in a profession like acting. Enough said about that. But I was stationed in the very south of the country, and the destruction to the forest there is a huge forest at the very tip of Vietnam called the U Minh Forest, which was burning, I believe, the entire time that the U.S. forces were there. They napalmed it, trying to eradicate the forest. Yeah, they napalmed it, and that forest just burned constantly. And Hue in 1966, in 1968 rather, the Tet Offensive destroyed the city of Hue. I can't imagine that you were actually there.
Yeah. Actually, one of the most fortunate things about the Tet Offensive is it did not destroy. Hue was the ancient capital of Vietnam, going back 1,000 years, well, or 800 years. They didn't destroy the palace. They didn't destroy the temples. Thich Nhat Hanh actually was raised in Hue and studied at one of the temples right at the edge of the city. I didn't learn that till much later, but so and there was the city was pretty much intact. There wasn't rubble. It was a very beautiful city when I was there. But I lived in an old French colonial house along with two other Foreign Service people. And my bathtub, each of our rooms had separate bathrooms. And my bathtub had a line of machine gun holes in it, where one of my predecessors had been executed during the Tet Offensive.
Wow.
It was, I was always sobering.
I'm happy to report that Etty and I went to Vietnam in 2017, the 50th anniversary of my arrival in that country. And I was so pleased to see that city again thriving, and that capitalism was actually in the saddle and riding Vietnam just the way it does here. That the communists had to move over in order to let the people make money. And I never met a Vietnamese that wasn't optimistic and a beautiful person.
I'll second that.
Great. Any other questions?
I see Marcia's hand.
Marcia?
Thank you. I just had one quick one. I loved being a therapist. You talked about supporting the development of self-worth. And then you said versus, and I think repentance and something else, and I missed that last thing.
I think obedience and repentance. And the obedience might be preceded by the idea of memorizing, because certainly as a young Catholic, I had a catechism to memorize and then obey.
Oh yeah, every week I did that.
Yeah.
in Protestantism. Yeah. was pretty good at the time. I was pretty good at the time, but anyway. All
Yeah.
right, thank you so much. I wanted to catch that and have it. I was taking notes, so
Great.
I missed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was wonderful.
Thank you. Is Lila?
Lydia,
Oh,
Yeah.
Lydia, sorry, Lydia.
that's okay. I just wanted to throw into the mix that if you were raised Presbyterian, you got the Calvinist message that everything was predestined. And that really bothered me. I did not like to be told. And I think one of those Plato type guys went along with that idea. Maybe you know which one of the early guys. It like everything has been done before. I remember hearing that message in college when freshman year, and I said, well, why bother to do anything?
Uh-huh.
Really affected me. You mean every song I write has been written before in one form or another? Very discouraging philosophies and congregational stuff that my mother grew up on. Oh my goodness. I could not figure out how she came from such puritanical roots. There was just such judgment. Those guys went back to the witch hunts. I mean, it's amazing what burdens we put on, the Catholic thing about original sin. Oh, Lord, I was blessed. They didn't have time to get me. They dropped me off at Presbyterians when they got around to it. So I was basically not schooled in a deep religion at all, except when I went to my aunt and uncle in Maine. And then we went to that congregational church. And you better remember, and you just think of it. But thank you.
Right.
I'm
So,
just so
thank
pleased
you, Lydia.
heard you today. It's such an honor. Thank you, Reverend Jack.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Our closing music comes from our own hymnal.